Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Heather Hudson. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning with the Washington Student Achievement Council. And this is our second Pave the Way virtual session. We are here today to talk about unlocking access to post-secondary enrollment, Fafsa and WASFA as a key strategy during the COVID-19 crisis. Today, we'll be hearing from Becky Thompson, Director of Financial Assistance, and Amelia Moore, Assistant Director of Policy and Planning at the Washington Student Achievement Council. We're thrilled to have already 100 participants joining us. We had over 300 people register, so we anticipate people will be coming in throughout the next hour and a half, but we are going to get started. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. We will be here from 1 to 2:30. We ask that everyone remain muted, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to share out your name and where you're from. And if you have questions throughout the session, we'll be monitoring the chat, and then we will take those questions. We will hold those questions until we get to the panel section, but we'll be sure to try and get to as many of your questions as possible. So before we get into our panel moderated by Jean-Claude from the Gates Foundation, which we're thrilled to have some national expertise here, I'm going to give just a quick overview for those of you that might not be familiar with the Washington Student Achievement Council. We are a state agency that offers policy and research development in leading the statewide strategic planning to increase post-secondary attainment for Washington State. We administer the state financial aid programs, including the Washington College Grant and the College Bound Scholarship, among others. And we also have some program and practice services that we offer to increase college access. We will talk about some of that today, like the 12th year campaign, as well as the federal Gear Up program. Next slide. We also are we have a 9-member council. This slide shows who is on that council, as well as our executive director, Michael Miotti. We have governor appointed members on the council, as well as representatives from the K-12 and higher education sectors. So that's a little bit about the Washington Student Achievement Council. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Becky Thompson.
Good afternoon, all of you. I'm just really excited about having the opportunity to be with you all virtually today. I am probably just as excited as you to get to the panel too, to hear how what's happening out there. But I'm going to get us started and talk a little bit about the context. And so really jumping into understanding the opportunity that we have in front of us and the challenge. So talking a little bit about the Washington College Grant, as well as where we're at as a state when it comes to enrollment and completion rates. We then are going to talk about the panel discussion, and then hope that we have a few minutes to talk about a statewide initiative, Aim Higher Washington. And we want to share a little bit because that initiative will only be successful with all of you involved. So glad to have you here today. Crystal, if you wouldn't mind going to the next one and then jumping right into the next one. So we want to start with really the opportunity. And when we talk about the opportunity, we're really talking about opportunity with our state financial aid program, the Washington College Grant. Hopefully this is something that is familiar to you. This is a longstanding program, but had a very historic investment that became effective just a few months ago with this current academic year. And it is truly a model state financial aid program. And that word I'm going to use intentionally, and hot off the presses yesterday, actually, would just mention that we we were named as the only state that really is meeting all of the equity focused pieces or measurements that the Education Trust when they looked at programs, state programs nationally. So a model program, but only a model program from my perspective, if in fact it is being accessed and really addressing affordability barriers to students that are eligible for that. So just as a quick kind of overview of what this program is, Crystal, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, and how it was recently expanded. And that is the guaranteed funding for eligible participants. And this really is a game changer in terms of how we can message eligibility for financial aid in Washington State. There's now no question that if you meet the eligibility criteria, that there will be state dollars for those students. So we can now start to message this program in ways that we have never done before. We also saw an expansion when it came to really the income the income eligibility, and I'll show that in a minute. And then we also are expanding into registered apprenticeships. So this is really more just for your reference here, and that is that we have, you know, just to give a sense of the income parameters for eligible students. For a family of 4, to receive a full award, their annual income, family income, $53,000 or less. And a full award is really the equivalent of public tuition. It's based on that. It can be used for other educational costs, but that's what the value of the award is based on, and can be used not just at public colleges, but participating private colleges as well. So 65 colleges throughout the state. Partial awards, so there are some prorations, and that gets us really in to a lot of other income, you know, much broader income up to $97,000. So that's the opportunity. We want to ensure that folks know about this program and that they can access it. So here comes the challenge. And I would say that this has been a challenge that has been something that we have been working on recently. It's not a new challenge, but I think Amelia in a few minutes is going to talk about even sort of the layering of the challenge in COVID-19 as well. So to receive the Washington College Grant, students have to really fill out a pretty cumbersome form, right? You all know that probably as well as I do. The forms that we're talking about is the free application for federal student aid. And here in the state of Washington, a student can complete that, or if not eligible for other types of federal aid, complete the Washington application for state financial assistance. When we look at who's filing year after year, roughly half of Washington seniors are not completing that form, leaving really over $50 million in we're just talking at this point, just federal dollars, not to mention the state dollars that they would not be accessing. And here in the state of Washington, our college going culture is weak among high school students, with just 60% of the class enrolled in a program within a year of high school graduation. So we want to take this a little bit deeper. So if we could move to the next slide. And I want to talk just a minute about the college going rate here. So, and to really point out the significant disparities that we see here. So so we already have a weak rate. You see that statewide rate at 60%. And then, and then this is the look across racial groups. And I just want to take a moment here to say that it's important to note that this low rate of enrollment is the system's responsibility, not the student's responsibility. The system is failing our students, especially our Native and Indigenous students, our Latinx students. And so, you know, that's why, one of the reasons why we're all here. And that, you know, really addressing this, we need to address it, and to have success, we need to be really focused in on these racial disparities. It's also important to note that despite facing this, these system barriers, Black and multiracial students have achieved parity with their white peers, and we need to celebrate that resiliency and also safeguard and protecting the gains of the students that we've made. And also keep in mind that parity is not the goal here. It's our college going rate is weak in general at the state. So, so here's, you know, the opportunity, and we need to do it with a racial equity look and lens and specific strategies. So let's just move to what we see with Fafsa and WASFA specifically. So I was talking about enrollment rates being, you know, weak. So why are we focusing really on Fafsa and WASFA filing? Well, it's because FAFSA completion is correlated with positive post-secondary outcomes. So here's just a few statistics for your reference in terms of really seeing that when seniors, high school seniors, file a FAFSA, you see a strong rate of then enrolling in college. And not only that, but also then looking at the persistence rate. So this is really where the real goal is here, which is to ensure that we, you know, have access and that students, and we're reducing those barriers. A credential is the goal here, that which you need enrollment, and you need persistence to get there. So if we look at this next piece, this is just giving you a few foundational sort of statistics about what we see in Washington related to the filing rates. And, you know, with a very strong financial aid program, year after year, we have seen Washington being the bottom 5 states nationally, when we look nationally, of our seniors class really filing a FAFSA. So, you know, really sitting right there in the 46% range. I want to also just provide some statistics about what we have seen over time with WASFA. And, you know, I think Heather already mentioned it. It's very important to us that we're always, all of our efforts are in the state of Washington about FAFSA and WASFA completion. But just to kind of point out, when we look nationally, those rankings are looking at FAFSA. But when we look at the FAFSA, we have seen some increases in terms of number of applicants. But I think we are, although we don't know probably where that the true sort of rate should be or number should be, I think there's no question that there are a lot of students missing the opportunity here in terms of WASFA filing. And so we need to focus our efforts on ensuring that we have support in the filing of the FAFSA, as well as the other supports that go with that. So as I quickly wrap up this next slide, just in terms of providing some foundational statistics. Crystal, if we can just look at the next one here. This just gives you a sense of the FAFSA completion by race. Again, it's critically important to approach this work from a race, in terms of addressing racial disparities. And you see, you know, where we have those disparities here on the left with FAFSA, as well as an error rate. And just quickly, what we mean by an error rate is, you know, these are where a student might submit a FAFSA, so they've done that completion, but there is something that has come back on their FAFSA that really does not allow for it to be complete unless they take additional action. And we know that that requires support and assistance to work through that. And so you also see disparities when it comes to the number of error rates that we see there. So with those pieces, I want to pass it along again, just for some foundation for our panel, to my colleague Amelia, who is going to cover some of the COVID-19 impacts that layer on top of this. Thanks, Amelia.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. And Crystal, if we could just go straight to the next slide, that'd be great. So the first thing this slide shows is how the pandemic affected spring 2020 enrollment in Washington. And you'll see that spring enrollment was down significantly for our 2-year institutions while holding fairly steady at our 4 years. But at both our 2-year and 4-year institutions, the largest enrollment declines in our state were experienced by students of color. So this is reflected nationally as well, with Black and Latinx students significantly more likely to take a leave of absence in spring 2020. And this is likely because due to the entrenched racism that we see across all of our systems, the pandemic has really hit communities of color the hardest, which means it's also hitting our students of color the hardest. And the impact also extends to the class of 2020. A national survey was done of seniors in spring 2020, and it showed that students of color were almost twice as likely as their white peers to say that they wouldn't go to college in the fall or that they weren't sure. And for more detailed information on this data and the impact on COVID-19 on both higher education and the labor market, I recommend checking out Wasac's full Lessons on Recovery report, and I'll drop a link in the chat to that momentarily. But this does provide sort of a snapshot view of how COVID is impacting post-secondary enrollment. Next slide, please, Crystal. And so this slide shows that Washington saw an overall decrease in Fafsa renewals during the last cycle. And Fafsa renewals are current post-secondary students who are refiling for the upcoming academic year. So it's an indicator of a student's plan to continue on with their education. But what's most troubling here is that the renewal rate was down significantly more for our Pell eligible students. And so that points to a decrease in low-income students filing. And I also just want to mention that there is very, very early data from the current cycle for first-time high school senior filers. So that's our class of 2021 students. As of October 9th, so again, I'm stressing very early data, only 9 days in, it does indicate that there out the gate is an overall decrease in filing in Washington. And it was particularly seen at our Title I eligible high schools. So those are schools that have high percentages of low-income students, and also at what NCAN classifies as high minority schools, which are high schools where at least 40% of the students are Black or Hispanic. There was a decrease at high minority schools of about 17% and a decrease at Title I eligible schools of about 21%. So again, I don't want to overstate those decreases because it's very, very early in the cycle, but I think it's important to note so that we are ensuring that we are being intentional and targeting our efforts to better serve both our low-income students and our students of color. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Heather so we can get to the best part of the session, our panel reaction. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Amelia. So I will be brief. I just want to say we are so thrilled to have Jean-Claude Brizard. He's the Senior Advisor and Deputy Director in U.S. Programs at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He is joining us today to help moderate our amazing panel. So before I hand it off to you, just a little bit more introduction about who Jean-Claude is. In his role as a senior advisor, he leads the U.S. Programs P16 Community Investment Team and their effort to more deeply understand a student's journey from preschool through completion of a post-secondary credential. He leads several strategies to close racial and economic achievement gaps in Washington State's educational system. He's the former chief executive of Chicago Public Schools. And prior to that, he was superintendent of schools for Rochester, New York School District. He has had a 21-year career as an educator and administrator with the New York City Department of Education. He served as a regional superintendent, supervising more than 100 schools in the borough of Brooklyn. And he also served as a systems executive director for its 400 secondary schools. He's also a fellow of the Broad Center, a fellow of the Pahara Aspen Institute, and a member of the Aspen Institute Global Leadership Network. A commercial pilot, Mr. Brizard credits his parents, both of whom were educators, with inspiring him to pursue a career in education. And he is also the proud father of 4 beautiful children. So I just wanted to offer this amazing introduction to our incredible moderator, Jean-Claude. We're so excited to have you. And I'd love to hand it off to you for some initial response and reactions to the presentation before we dig into the conversation with our panelists.
Heather, thank you so very much for this wonderful introduction. Say a little bit about the P16 Community Investment Team, because I think it is sort of related to this conversation. Much of our effort is to really understand the transition points from pre-K all the way. We say post-secondary completion, but frankly, more and more we're looking at workforce attainment and frankly, workforce success. And getting lots of exemplars from what we're seeing in places like Dallas County in the state of Texas, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Buffalo, New York, and frankly from Tacoma, Washington. We just highlighted Tacoma at an all-staff meeting a couple of weeks ago at the foundation. So lots of work there being done, as you can imagine, in closing the gap in high school graduation. The next beast they're looking to tackle now is exactly this conversation, really in improving their post-secondary success, post-secondary matriculation, and frankly, persistence. I think Amelia and Becky did an amazing job of setting the stage, setting the table. If it's okay, love to add a few more data points to the conversation. One, you may have noticed, all of you may have noticed the improvements in FAFSA in the form. We've got some more work to do. A lot of that was done by our post-secondary team, working with advocates in Washington, DC, to make the form a lot easier for our kids, for our families to actually complete. Also don't want to, I know I'm perhaps preaching to the choir, but we say choirs need practice too, right? That we know the value of a post-secondary education. The fact is that when you look at kids who are living in poverty, if they get a college degree, they have a 500% chance of coming out of poverty. So there's no question about that. When you look at the current COVID impact, the Seattle Times published recently that, nearly 70% of people with a 4-year degree are telecommuting. They're working from home, right? Whereas if you compare that to those with only a high school degree or less, it's only about 25, 26%. So the people who are perhaps able to best navigate this pandemic are the ones with a 4-year education. So when you look at the life outcomes of a young person, frankly, a 4-year degree, and for that matter, sometimes a 2-year degree will make a huge difference. Some of you may have seen the publication last week from National Student Clearinghouse, NSC, also published in the New York Times. Some of it showed up in the Seattle Times story, and some of it was sort of pronounced here in the presentation, that nearly a quarter of students are not enrolling in community colleges, and we all know that the vast majority of kids who go to community college are kids who are poor, Black or brown. And we know that many of these kids, frankly, it's not taking a year off, they're never going to come. And the kids who are dropping out are not taking a year off, they're never going to come back to college. So when you compare that, you look at the disparities in race and ethnicity and the kinds of outcomes these kids will have a number of years from now, this pandemic is having a lasting, and frankly, a forever impact in this. Michael Mayotte said it really well in the Seattle Times that this disruptive experience has a long tail. This is not just a 1-year issue, it's not a 2-year issue. We're going to see the data, this kind of disparity data showing up in the life outcomes of young people for decades to come. So one of the things that we've been doing a lot of in with the foundation in my work in Washington State is working with a group called the Community Center on Education Results, CCER. They have a wealth of data as well around which kids go to college directly, which ones go and persist, and the kinds of courses they're taking in high school, et cetera. We do know in Washington State, we don't have as much of a problem of kids staying. Yes, we have work to do there too, right? But the problem is not as pronounced. The bigger problem, frankly, is kids going from high school to post-secondary. And you heard from the presentation that the FAFSA completion, frankly, is a tipping point, a major point for a lot of kids. The good news is that we have an amazing panel today, and they're going to help us solve all of this. So on the group, we have a financial aid specialist from Green River College. We have Anna Brosius, Daniela, who's from the Northwest Education Access. Forgive me if I pronounce your name. A career specialist from Walla Walla Public Schools. Just had a case of wine delivered from Walla Walla. By the way, amazing wine. Linda Vargas Villanueva, who is an undocumented initiatives ambassador from Washington State University. Mike Hall, a principal from Pateros High School, and Sativa Jones, who is a council member and assistant director of college and career from Highline Public Schools. So we have set the stage for the conversation. I'm going to pose a question to all of you panelists, and perhaps maybe we'll start with the high school principal, because I was a high school principal at one point in my career, and I really believe that school leaders are the pivot points in the system. They are the ones, frankly, who see what is happening from PE all the way to 12th grade, most of the time, at least 9, 12, and frankly they have a view into what is going on beyond the walls of their schools. So what is the cause? Why do we have, again, we have very progressive policies in Washington State that offer a lot of opportunities for kids, yet the uptake is anemic, as was described in the presentation. What do you think is the cause of all of this, Mike?
Well, I think looking at our community and our school system and stuff, I think some of it is the trust that our families have with divulging information and such. You know, they're nervous about that. So that'd be number one on my list. And I that's one of the reasons why our counselor, and I give her so much credit for connecting and building that rapport with our students, first of all, and then our parents, because, you know, regardless of somebody's status, whether it's a student or the families, it's an equal opportunity. And our counselor does a fantastic job of doing that. So I give her all the credit in the world. You know, we try to make it as much a college going atmosphere in our school as we can through our initiatives with Gear Up and Avid and our college prep classes. But if we don't have that connection and that trust with our families out there, it's difficult. It's a tough task. And I'm talking about our school, a rural school in north central Washington near Lake Chelan, that we might have 20 to 30 senior students on a given year. And, you know, that's few enough numbers that we don't let kids fall through the cracks, but you still have to have the trust and faith from your parents.
Mike, thank you. So from that, why don't we go to Linda from a student's perspective? So what do you see?
So I think one of the biggest things, I do really agree with Michael, but one of the biggest things would be for me is abnormal family pressures. And this is something that are becoming way bigger now during COVID, but has always existed within our communities. And that's something I'm very familiar with, because as a undocumented student advocate, this is something that we definitely see inside of the undocumented community. And it's not always because the parents just don't want them to go to college. It's the lack of information within the community. The parents don't know about the resources that exist. And just this year, I had a student reach out to me who was going to be a freshman this year, and she was a FAFSA recipient, but she emailed me and wanted to have a conversation with me and her parents, because her parents are not being very supportive of her attending college. And the main fear for the parents were that college was expensive because these are the stereotypes behind college. It's not affordable. But this student, once we sat down with one of the financial aid representatives, the FAFSA was covering everything. It was covering all her costs. And because of COVID as well, she wasn't staying in the dorm. So she had extra money that they were going to return to her. And she already had accepted 2 grants that she did not need. So we were able to cancel those grants. But it goes back to that lack of communication. I think this is something that our education system's lacking, that they're not meeting this bridge between home and school. I think it's very important that we meet those needs, and it's not the responsibility of the student to inform their parents or teach them about financial aid. They should be part of the conversation as well through the high school system. The parents should be just as informed as the students, and this will in a way alleviate those stresses for the parents and allow them to encourage their students to pursue a higher education. And as I said before, this is something that has always been present in the undocumented community, but it's been really public in the undocumented community, but it exists in all the community. All low-income students have these lacks of bridges between their home and school. And I think I do understand that it's sometimes very hard to communicate with parents because of barriers such as language. Parents don't have sometimes they don't even have an email that they can be reached at as well. But I think COVID has definitely brought to light the communication that can exist and that has been lacking for so long. And during COVID, I moved back home for a bit just to be with my family and help my parents out with my little brothers, because now my parents that don't speak English are my siblings' teachers, and you can imagine how that's going. So, but it's just been a very beautiful experience just to see and just to like emphasize real quick, my home is Tacoma, so I'm part of the Tacoma area. So the teachers have been able to allow websites to be turned into Spanish versions, have sent home assignments that are translated into Spanish. And this is something that should have always been done, because the parents cannot help students the way that a parent that has a post-secondary education and knows English can help a student. So it has really allowed my mom to be more involved with my siblings' educational journey and be able to help them a lot. So I think there has been a good and bad from COVID, but that said, this is something that we're seeing that can be done. So why hasn't it been done before? We have to make sure that we are encouraging these needs, and not just in our populations that are very high Latino students or that the demographics match. It should be done in all of the public institution.
Linda, thank you. And Daniela, I saw you're shaking your head quite a bit. If you don't mind, I'm going to layer on the second part to this question. I know when I was in Chicago, we learned that frankly 90% of the kids who were graduating high school, when they went to college, those who went had to work as well. How much of the finances beyond the college tuition, books, dorms, etc., that is a barrier for kids to access post-secondary? And if you want to go to the root causes of the anemic uptake as well, please by all means do both.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Just so many things are coming up, and everything that Linda was saying, I was like, yes, I completely see that. Yeah, as an undocumented educator, you know, I graduated from college just last year from UW-Bothell, and so I have a very personal experience around, you know, applying to WASFA and all of that. But I want to say, you know, when I went, I had an older sister who helped me with filling out the WASFA, right? And so if it weren't for my older sister that navigated the system before me, I don't know what would have happened to me, right? Because there's just not that support, or, you know, educators may not know like super well versed in filling out the WASFA. I remember my teachers in high school they would just say Fafsa or FAFSA, and that's all I heard, and I knew, you know, immediately that was just not meant for me, right? And I currently work at Northwest Education Access, where I work with a lot of students of color, students that have been pushed out from the education system, and they're coming back to do their high school completion program. And I'm partnered with Renton Tech College, where I work. I'm partnered with a high school completion class, so I work with that instructor directly to once her students finish their high school degree with her, I walk them through the steps of what's next for them. It's actually part of her curriculum. So she, you know, has those students meet with me, and I support them in filling out the financial application, enrolling into college, whichever it is, right? Whether we're in the tech or other ones. The point is that during the pandemic, I noticed that a lot of my students have been just kind of slipping through the cracks because one, they're losing their homes. Second, they need access to healthcare and don't have it. Third, they're getting kicked out of their parents' homes. They're just not like finding a way to live. So really the biggest thing I've noticed during COVID-19 is that students are just not anywhere able to focus on education right now because their main focus is on surviving, right? Through the pandemic, like the virus itself, but also all of these other essential needs that folks need, and they just need to go to work, find a job. Many of my students also are like, I really need to find a job. And that's where I've noticed that we all know the intersection, right, of all of these other pieces, how they intersect with education. Education is not just like, oh, here, it's super accessible. There's so many other pieces that I've noticed my students go through. And to just touch a little bit on the rates that I've seen that you showed us, I noticed how like 2015, 2016, and 2017 were really one of the lowest WASFA completion rates. And I do a lot of undocumented ally trainings for educators in Washington State. So I have a lot of experience with the WASFA application. And around those times, like 2015, 2016, 2017, those were the lowest rates of WASFA completion. And that's because of the Trump administration, right? I want us to think about the political climate. And when, Trump started his campaigning around 2015, 2016, all of this, racist and, this language that was attacking undocumented communities came about. And a lot of undocumented communities, like really, we went from unapologetic and unafraid, which is very real. It just kind of traced and took a lot of steps backwards, right? Like, fuck that, I was scared. And that was a very real experience that swept through undocumented communities that they were like, I'm not gonna fill out the WASFA. I'm giving out information about my household, my family. I just can't do that, right? So that is why we really saw a very low rate of completion around that time. And just now are we seeing more undocumented folks starting to fill out the WASFA again. Sorry, I spoke a lot, but just like I said, so many things that I wanted to share. I hope I answered the question.
You did. And Daniela, so much of what you say resonate, and just watching frankly what is happening in Texas, both with the Commit partnership in Dallas and the Rio Grande Valley work. So much of what you're talking about is what they've been attacking. So the narrative coming out of Washington, and frankly, the kinds of COVID issues, and looking at addressing it both locally and what they can do on state policy, frankly, to support kids transition from high school to post-secondary. So thank you. So Catherine, I'm going to keep moving up the system now. So what do you see? You said in the chat that you've got a slideshow, if you want to show a slideshow, but if you want to talk through perhaps what is Walla Walla doing?
Yeah, the things that Michael said about the trust, I totally see here, as well as what Daniela and Linda were saying about the distrust of the government and you have to trust someone to fill it out. And so here in Walla Walla, as many of you probably know, we have a large number of students whose parents are college professors. And we also have a large number of students whose parents work in the wine and the onions and the apple fields and everything in between. And so I've been trying to do a lot of relationship building this year for FAFSA, where I send out FAFSA and WASFA, I send out these weekly emails. I made a slideshow that and a website about the FAFSA and WASFA that I put into the chat that I sent out to all of our parents through School Messenger. And we're trying to use the information to get students able to do it on their own. If they need help, we now have the slideshow that's 86 slides of screenshots of the FAFSA and what they should do. And it also links to the WASFA. So for students that need to fill out the WASFA. And then students who need assistance, I am under the CTE umbrella, so I am able to bring 5 students at a time on campus. And so we've been doing a sign up genius to allow students to bring themselves and maybe a parent on campus so we can walk through the safety of it, reiterating that we don't want to do the FAFSA or the WASFA over Zoom because you don't want to give your social security number or your citizenship status when it's not safe, but being able to do it in person, doing our signature pages. and just really making it an environment where they know that they can trust me. They know that I know the system. I can ask and use my citizen and white privilege to be able to ask questions for my students to keep them safe. And then I also have, in the unprofessional world, I also have a group of undocumented students that come to my house once a month for dinner to talk about like the challenges, and I network with them with undocumented alumni so they know that there are resources. So it's just trying to meet everyone where they need assistance, with the hopes that it doesn't like totally take our staff completely to the bottom, and we're able to help people with what's effective to get our completion rates up.
Thank you, Catherine. So Taiva, move to you in Highline. I know you work for a very progressive superintendent, I know Susan well. She's one of my favorite people in this world. So I know this is really front of mind for her. And frankly, having you in that position must mean that she has tremendous trust in what you're doing. So tell me how you're solving this in Highline.
Yeah, well, it starts there. We have leadership that is willing to allow us to be innovative and is super supportive. So this has been something tough for us to navigate, but I think the things that have made us most effective throughout this process is getting grounded in our data and our demographic. And so we have access to such great data, whether it's the portal through Wasac. We have great regional data in our area through the Community Center for Educational Results, and then we have our district data. And so whatever data you have access to, really getting grounded and understanding who you're serving from those different banks of data that we had access to, we just kind of looked at it all, and something became very apparent. We saw things like we compared our different racial demographics with home language, and also looked at our college-bound students and seen that our families that home language was Spanish were completing at a rate lower than our English-speaking home. And so we don't send out communication only in English. If we send out something in English, we always send it out in Spanish, whether it's a postcard or newsletters, being inclusive of that process. We nothing short of harass our college-bound families because we want to really make sure that they get access to this information. And so over communicating through phone calls and outreach and making sure that our families are aware of what's available to them. Our partnerships in our district have been essential. As you see, and I shared in the chat, a step-by-step tutorial for both FAFSA and WASFA. When we talk about financial aid in Highline Public Schools, we don't talk about FAFSA, we talk about financial aid, and that's always inclusive of WASFA. And so we have YouTube tutorials that we did in partnership with South Seattle College Trio program, who have been amazing partners to us. And there's line-by-line videos to help navigate students and families, both the FAFSA and WASFA application. Because unfortunately, to Catherine's point earlier, is that we can't be face-to-face with our students the way that we want to be. And in addition to making sure that we're inclusive of the WASFA process, we also have an obligation to make sure that we're protecting the privacy of those students. And so we don't keep lists of WASFA filers. We don't do WASFA exclusive events. We're just always inclusive of both experiences so that everyone is getting that information regardless if they're a FAFSA or WASFA filer. As we kind of walked ourselves through the entire process of financial aid, we thought about signature page as well. And so we now have a portal where students and families can submit their signature page to me via email. And I print it, I send them back directions, and I also send them an addressed envelope for them to mail it off. And I mail it back to them for them to then sign and mail off. And so really it has been about pivoting and finding the resources to remove the barriers that are in front of our families. So the first time we got an email from a student saying, how do I get my signature page in? We have to establish a process for these gaps. And so I think those are the things that we have to be mindful of, is always re-strategizing and pivoting. I think the last 2 years pre-COVID, we found the methods to the madness by meeting our families where they were at. So instead of financial aid being twice a year in the school building, we went out to the community and hosted our events at the Boys and Girls Club, at the library, and apartment cabanas, and meeting our families where they are instead of always expecting to us. And we finally had it figured out, and it was effective. And then here comes COVID. So always having that nimble approach to know that you're going to have to re-strategize to fit the needs of your families and your staff. My staff looks like who we serve. And so when we get a parent that calls, we have someone that's bilingual on our team because we serve a large Spanish-speaking population. So representation is also important to make sure that we have folks on our team that come from our communities where our students come from, so that we understand their experience, and to support our staff just in general. This time of year for college access providers, reps, and all of you on the screen, it's burnout season. And so also making sure that as a district, we're being flexible with their time and making sure folks are compensated for doing late events and just reacting to the needs of our staff and our students and our families. And I think those are the things, the things that have turned something as much as just a 3% increase. That is access for 3% more of our families, and that's a win. And just knowing that it's a slow and steady process, but one worth re-strategizing around to continue to see numbers go up for our families. So that's kind of just like a quick spiel of some of the things that we've employed to make sure that our students, our families, and our staff are adequately served.
Sativa, thank you, and sorry for mispronouncing your name.
No worries.
Yeah, I get a lot of that, so I should know better. So question I have for you, just a follow-up question, just thinking about Highline's place in King County and your proximity to Highline College. Does that help at all to have an ecosystem where a lot of your kids go to? I mean, when I look in the roadmap, look at CCER data, you guys do better than most, frankly. Why is that?
It's actually an area that we have been trying to wrap our brains around, is how do we become more of a pipeline? We are a leaky one. And how do we have a mutual responsibility to make sure that our students transition, that it's not just their job, but as a school district, that's also our job. So a few summers ago, I actually see some of the staff that supported us in this is we had transition events in the summer where we worked with the college specifically to make sure that students' financial aid to-do lists, and it's a work in progress. And that's where that re-strategizing and seeing where those gaps are. But those partnerships from K-12 to post-secondary systems is so essential, in addition to the community partners. So our TRIO programs, our CSFs, our Dream Project partners, it has been a collective impact approach to everyone's hands on board, students being assigned to different folks in the buildings to make sure that every student is getting the information and the support that they need. And even still, we're missing the mark in some spaces. And so having that open dialogue with our partnering in pipeline colleges has been a huge support to kind of help patch up some of those leaky pieces that we have in that pipeline. It's a work in progress.
Thank you. Thank you. And Anna, finally to you. You're the higher ed person here. So what role and what do you see as your role perhaps in solving this dilemma?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to second everything that everybody before me has said. All of those things, we're all on the same page in terms of what the challenges are and in terms of what some of the solutions are. So I think from my role and my perspective, I'm really fortunate to be at a college that has really decided to invest in Fafsa and WASFA completion and has decided that this is an issue. So in our community college is also located in South King County in the city of Auburn, which has about a 55% FAFSA completion rate. So that makes it really challenging. That means that there's a lot of students, hundreds, potentially thousands, that are not getting access to post-secondary education. So that's a real challenge. So I was really fortunate. I'm still new in this role. I'm still like Sativa was saying, we're being nimble. We're taking it day by day. We're figuring out what we're going to do in terms of the COVID environment. But a lot of what we've done is create those strategic community partnerships. So actually my role came out of a conversation that happened between our college and our high schools and our community partners. And they decided to form what's called an Auburn task force to really increase the financial aid completion rates in our area and make that a real goal, and knowing that that is what is needed to get more students access to post-secondary education. So having people from all around the community, whether they're a real estate agent, you know, a business person, a community leader, from the International Rescue Committee serving, you know, immigrants and refugees, all types of people who touch our students in all kinds of ways. Doesn't have to be a high school provider or a college, community college provider, all getting together and talking about how we can work together collectively to increase those rates. So that's one of the things we're doing. And the second thing that we're really doing is we're really focusing on increasing capacity in our area through doing trainings. So, you know, as Linda mentioned, one of our challenges is that families don't really understand some of the processes around financial aid. So we want more people who are actually in the community, in the network, that actually know. When we talk to students and then we ask them, how did they find out about financial aid? How did they know? They always say, it was my older sibling, or, you know, there's somebody at my school who helped me. It's not necessarily the traditional person that you would look to as being an authority on that. So we really want to work on training everybody, and leaders can look very different and be in very different places all the time, and training those folks to understand some of the really basic things about financial aid, such as what application should you fill out, when's the best time to apply, what year of taxes do you need, some of that really basic information so that folks are getting accurate and correct information. And they're also understanding why the process is complicated. So that's one of the other things. And finally, one of the really important things that we're doing is we offer drop-in help for Fafsa WASFA. We have a Zoom lobby that's on our website, and it's open to any student, any high school student, anybody, anywhere. They don't have to be intending to come to Green River College. So we've made that open to everybody, and we have those open hours from 8 to 5 Monday to Friday. We're training more and more staff on our campus to be able to be navigators for students and help sit through an application with them. And we're getting more folks on there so that people can actually sit down with somebody and get help filling out the application. And really, that's what makes all of the difference. When we look at the data, it's really sitting down with another person and having somebody really patiently wait with you while you get frustrated to really help you, encourage you to keep moving, keep going to the next step, even when things get hard. So that's what we're doing. We're scheduling appointments with students. We're following up when they don't show up, when we're not seeing them. And we did a lot of work over the summer to really decrease that summer melt. So we worked a lot with students who had said that they were intending to come here in the fall, and we saw that they didn't have a financial aid application. And we did some really proactive outreach. I was calling some of those students every 2 weeks, asking them when they were going to get things done. And it took some time, but I think what's really important is being persistent and consistent in our communication, and using as many channels as we possibly can to reach students.
Anna, thank you. So we've heard a bit about, information. We've heard quite a bit about trust. We've heard about the bridge between family, home, and the student in the school. All those things are critical. We also heard from Sativa and from I think Anna as well, talking about this idea of collectively or collective action to get this thing done. So one institution can do it by themselves. It really requires this kind of sort of a wrap around young people. So Catherine, I wanted to ask maybe a question from earlier discussion around myth, around mindset. How much of that is playing into all of this?
I think it's huge. I think that the Washington College grant being so new definitely goes against the long-held beliefs that unless you are at poverty, you won't qualify for the Pell Grant, and therefore you shouldn't fill out any financial aid papers. And I think that it's going to be really up to people in roles like mine, where we need to start saying there's so much more money available there, and just the door is open and go through it, because it's kind of like any other excuse. If one person's not doing it, everyone else is like, I don't need to do that. So really trying to pave the way to make it for everybody. I think there's also, just as we talked about, the safety and identity. There's a lot of thoughts that the Fafsa or the WASFA aren't safe because of citizenship and identity issues. And so really trying to dispel those myths and show that they aren't connected to the things that are scary in this world. And then I think there's a lot of myths about disability, or if your family doesn't qualify for file taxes, or all of that stuff. So just I've been really intentional about trying to make sure that I am making it clear that no matter what our students have in their home situation or with their families, they will have a financial aid form that they need to fill out. And I think that's something that is going to become the impetus on high schools from here on out, to show that it is a very important thing to do.
Catherine, thank you. So we're beginning to get questions from the group, so please keep putting them in the chat. Heather's curating a few for me, so I'm going to ask the first one, and this one is close to my heart. My first year teaching was at a prison in New York, a place called Rikers Island. This one is from Haley. It says, I'm currently working with incarcerated students who'll be participating in our Second Chance Pell program through Walla Walla Community College at Coyote Ridge Correction Center. We currently have no avenue to apply for WASFA for these students due to no internet access, email accounts, etc. Any ideas? And this, again, tossing it out to all of you, my amazing panelists.
Yeah, I'll take that one for sure. So I guess I want to just clarify, they might be eligible for federal financial aid. So I wouldn't assume that they're necessarily WASFA students. There is a paper FAFSA that does exist. So I would see if you can get some paper FAFSAs to those folks. So those are specifically designed for students who are in correctional facilities who don't have access to internet and computers. So I know there are some other folks on the call too who are happy to post a link in there about how you can do that as well.
Thanks, Anna. Anybody else want to jump into this one? If not, I have a question. I think we'll toss it Mike.
I was just going to say, in response to that question, we have some of our financial aid and college access folks here on the team. So please keep putting your questions in the chat, and we can always follow up afterwards with you if you're interested in being more closely connected with the help from the Wasac team.
Thanks, Heather. So we have a question from Carol. I think, Mike, this might be for you or anybody else who wants to do this. Do any of these efforts programs also help encourage students to enroll in dual credit programs like Running Start or college and high school? You're on mute, Mike.
I could actually take that too.
Go ahead, Catherine. I'll follow up.
Okay, I'm in charge of our district's dual credit things, and we always try to, when we do the SIRS aspect of the dual credit CTE, we always try to also do FAFSA at the same time. I think that's the connection that can definitely get a lot stronger, because form fatigue, I think that timing may not be ideal, but I do love the thought of trying to have those partner together a little bit more, and just making it clear, especially to Running Start students, that even though they're in college now, that doesn't mean that they don't need to fill out the financial aid forms in the future. Mike, it's all you.
Well, I think those programs are pertinent, definitely, because it gives those kids some free credits to start with, and might jumpstart them and pique their interest in going on to college. And then, you know, we get the buy-in for your FAFSA and stuff like that. But valuable programs in our school for sure.
And
I'd like to add something real quick.
Go ahead, Linda.
So I did Running Start when I was in high school as well. And I think Catherine does bring up a good point. My counselor would constantly remind me of WASFA and FAFSA because I'd go in to have my classes approved. But one of the mistakes that my counselor did make that I think is something that like exists as well as like those stigmas or stereotypes. My counselor would only mention FAFSA, I think because I was such a successful student. I was always in AP classes. So it was just that assumption that I would be a FAFSA student. My English was good, my grades were good. So I had to kind of like figure out what WASFA was on my own, and that I wasn't eligible for FAFSA, I was eligible for WASFA. And also just, I think there has to be more attention when it comes to Running Start and WASFA and FAFSA, is that the Running Start credits and that cost is not going to add on to your 4 years or your certain credits that are given to you through your FAFSA and WASFA. I think a lot of people have that misconception that because they did Running Start, that it was already being covered through their WASFA and FAFSA, so therefore they have limited credits that they can actually participate in once they get to a 4-year institution.
Thank you. Anna?
Yes. So I can talk a little bit about what we're doing to collaborate with our Running Start office at our college. So we have a large Running Start population. We have about 1,200 students at the college who are enrolled in Running Start. So a lot of what we're doing is we're training Running Start, our Running Start staff, so that they're aware, just like you said, Linda, that there's a difference between FAFSA and WASFA, and that the language that we're using is inclusive, and that we're getting people started on that Ready, Set, Grad questionnaire to begin with, so people aren't asking questions or making assumptions. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're also talking with them about now, especially as students are starting to register, going to start registering for winter quarter, really having every single time that an advisor is having an appointment with a student, telling them, hey, did you apply? Make sure that you apply right now, and directing them to our office if they need help, and letting them know that we've got those Zoom lobby hours if they need some drop-in help. And I also have appointment hours in the evenings if students are unable to make those daytime hours. So that's one of the things that we're doing. We're also collaborating on doing some workshops specifically for our students. And later on in November, kind of closer to the end of the month, we're going to start doing some campaigns and actually calling those students once we have some of those groups narrowed down to see who hasn't submitted it yet, and calling them and seeing if we can prod them to show up to it or show up to drop-in hours and get some more help.
Thank you. Once I'm asking the next question, maybe to juxtapose, Mike, your push and your work, and Linda, perhaps your experience. I know different institutions. So we know from our work at the foundation, the Gates Foundation, that college advising at the high school level is critical, frankly, in making a lot of this happen. So Mike, what does that look like for you in your high school? And Linda, I'll come back to you and ask you how you experienced that as a student. But Mike, in your high school, what does that look like? If you want to layer on a bit as to what that looks like in the COVID environment, that'd be awesome as well.
Well, during the COVID environment, I go back to last March when things kind of fell apart. Our kids finished up their school year in a strange way. We all know that, way different than any of us had ever experienced. And so instead of moving on to 4-year colleges and even some trade schools or into the services, some of our kids went out and got jobs to let this thing kind of see where it goes. And contrary to the stat that came up that said community colleges were losing enrollment, our kids tended to stay. The closest one for us is Wenatchee Valley College, and they tended to stay put in that because of the COVID. And then, like I said, wait and see where this all settles. I do have a quick story for everybody. Our ASB president last year did not do Running Start because she's very intelligent and organized and on top of everything. She didn't do well with online learning with the Running Start. She tried it. So she got out of that and just went through school and graduated, but signed up to go to WSU, and guess what they're doing down there? They're on campus, but they're doing everything online. So she's calling back frustrated, saying, I can't do this. And we're trying to give her the gentle push from here saying, yes, you can. So those are some of the pandemic situations that we've had so far. We had our counselor had a senior class meeting yesterday on campus in our gymnasium with tables distance, and we could have 2 kids per table. And she was working on FAFSA stuff that yesterday morning. When I walked in, she asked all the kids, how many of you guys are done with your FAFSA? And there's a few hands sprinkled up. And then she goes, how many of you have started it? And every hand went up. So, I like that. I think that was, that's a good sign there for us. We like to get 100% of our kids to finish it if we can, even though we're small, like I mentioned earlier. We lose a few of those kids because Some of them know they're going into the military maybe, or they're going to go straight into the workforce, and they already know what that job is because they're working already. So those are pandemic situations there a little bit. Jean-Claude, what was the rest of your question, sir?
I'm just thinking about what sort of advising looked like in your high school in helping students move from high school to post-secondary.
Well, that's, again, I just give accolades to our counselor because she just is wonderful. She's constantly telling our kids that there's something out there for you. There's a piece of this pot of money over here you can get if you just do this work. If you just do this work and get it in on time, then you stand in line for some. It's there for you. If the longer you wait, the smaller that little pot of money gets over there. And I'm not sure that's totally accurate, but that's what I'm hearing her say. I like it. So the kids get their stuff done. We have a college going environment. I really think we do. We love the competitions with the doorways and dress up days and college trivia cahoots and all that. We try to encourage all of our kids to think post-secondary, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, trade school, YO Tech, the services. We don't care as long as they, set their sights high and go for their dreams.
Awesome. Mike, can I put you on the spot a little bit though in asking you about, I know as a former high school principal, this was a big issue for me. And I wonder if it is for you too, the ratio of students to counselor in your school. Do you have enough resources, to put it bluntly, to do what you need to get done?
Jean-Claude, absolutely not. We never have enough counseling going on, and we're a small school. Our counselor does serve students from TK now all the way through 12th grade, and she's stretched thin, but we do build in our class schedule a college prep class that she requires all of our seniors to attend, even though we're on a cohort right now with the purple and gold cohorts. They come in 2 days per week plus Zoom on the other days, but she's spread pretty thin. But the college prep really helps in working on that FAFSA and WASFA and college applications in general, and scholarshiping. Those are all huge. And she stretched thin. We could always use more, but we make do with what we got.
Thank you. Appreciate the candor. Linda, your experience, what should be done, or what did you experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a little bit of both of the sides of like now as a college student, but when I was in high school. I think when I was in high school, most of my financial aid stuff I did on my own. But I think that also has to do with how private I was with my undocumented status at the time. I wasn't very open about my undocumented status then. So I didn't feel confident in reaching out for resources for specifically WASFA because as I said before, my counselor would definitely push FAFSA a lot, but they did have a WASFA night. But I think I was very afraid of showing up to this WASFA night, which meant that every single student there is undocumented, and who was going to be there, who was going to be seeing who was undocumented. So from that perspective, I think like definitely my own identity problems and being confident with my undocumented status really prevented me from seeking help with my WASFA. But thankfully, during college visits, I went to Washington State University for multiple different site visits. We did like cash conference, and they did do a little bit of talking about WASFA there, which is where I got most of my information. And now as a college student, I do work a lot with my mentees, students that I mentor that are undocumented, first income, and we do a lot of WASFA. As soon as WASFA or FAFSA opened, we do WASFA FAFSA night, and we just did it, I believe, last week on Thursday, so a week ago. Yeah, so they hung around and we talked about it, and I think this is another perspective of what is going on as well. A lot of our students, there is a big push for them to fill out their WASFA and FAFSA as soon as that, well, they're in high school, seniors in high school, but then they kind of lose help as they move on through college. And it's really important that they're also aware of different financial resources at their university, or how to get around FAFSA and WASFA. One of the questions my student had, it was her first time filing taxes, and she did not know what she should include on her side of the tax information, or how to work around that information. Thankfully, I have a contact in financial aid for our university, so I always reach out to her and have her help the students if there are questions that I don't know. And then secondly, appeals, that's a possibility at most colleges, that students can appeal the financial aid they get. And this is very important right now during COVID, because the taxes that are being used are not the ones from this year, they're the ones from previous year. And that's not reflecting what what their home situation might be. Their parents might not be able to provide that same support now at this time, because they might have lost a job because of COVID. So, and students do not know this. They think that what they get is the end of it. That's all they can get. And they can appeal it with their financial aid office. And that's something that we have to bring more attention to, especially during these very difficult times for our students and their parents.
Linda, thank you. I mean, I have a second-year college student, my daughter. I didn't know you could do that, so you just taught me something, so thank you. Daniela, you're a recent college student, so from your perspective, what should or could be done on advising?
Yeah, thank you. I can share a little about my personal experience and also some of the professional experience I have with, the undocumented LA trainings I do for educators that are mostly for higher education, educators, but I think as a good blanket statement for every educator, no matter what, like even in the public school systems, is to just enforce an inclusive language, making sure that you mention both FAFSA and WASFA. Now that things have gone virtual, how do you bring that virtually right into your classroom space? So whether it be in your Canvas hub, having like a little folder of undocumented resources. I had a professor in college who had that, and I really, really appreciated that, because it had all of these resources that I was pretty well versed in at the time, because I've been very heavily involved with just in the undocumented world for a while, but for students that were undocumented and maybe not as heavily involved as myself, I mean, I was very out, so all my professors knew, but not all students are that way, right? So making sure that is saved and very accessible to students. And in my trainings, I really just tell educators, it is very heavy labor for us undocumented folks to come out to you all the time. So how are you actively coming out to your students as an educator that is one, well-versed and knowledgeable around undocumented accessibility within education, and making sure that you show up for them, right? Like you don't just say, oh, here's resources, but you may not be super well versed in actually using them. So definitely trainings, how do you get trained up on filling out the WASFA, the HB, knowing about the HB 1079, which is in-state tuition for undocumented folks. I also offer some conversation guides that I can actually copy on the chat for folks. We have like a good list of do's and don'ts type of thing, of what to talk about, like what not to talk about, or like what not to bring up, right, to undocumented students. I also have this scholarship list this scholarship website that has really, really good list of scholarships for undocumented students. I also recommend attending the HB 1079 conference. I don't know if folks have heard of that conference before, but it's all about undocumented resources. It's open to everybody, to students, educators, families. And there's typically many workshops just talking about financial aid and tuition. And I've seen educators bring their students from high school that are undocumented to really see all the leaders in Washington that are undocumented and leading this work. I also recommend doing safety plans with students, which we created a safety plan packet, both in English and Spanish, because the ones we've seen before, they're just so long and very confusing. After I filled one out before myself, and I was like, oh, this is just too much. So we made a super short, more practical packet, both in English and Spanish. And I recommend educators getting very engaged with students, not just about education, but all of these other pieces, right? Like, what if one of the family members gets deported? How do you support your students during that time? And we cover that in the trainings that I give to educators. So that's the work I do with Washington Dream Coalition. If that's something your school is interested in, you can reach out to our Facebook page through a direct message. We're on Washington Dream Coalition on Facebook, and we cover all about how to support students if their families were to go through that. Yeah, I think that's pretty, yeah. And in terms of my personal experience is just having really instructors and educators making it super like having, you know, in the physical world where we would see each other in person, having anything in the classroom that says, there's this little sign that says, I'm an unafraid educator in support for undocumented students. So that was really nice to see, because I'm like, okay, I know I can trust you, right? It's kind of like with that, like that safety pin that folks came up with a while back. So yeah, that's just a little bit about what comes up at this moment for me.
Thank you, Daniela. So we have a question from Meg. She says, the system supports are great. Any best practices so far in how we communicate the advantage of continuing to post-secondary rather than waiting a year or two? Any takers on this one? Keep going. My daughter right now is at Loyola University in Chicago. I sent her to Chicago. I told her, go grow up. I said, you're not taking a year off. But again, I could afford to do that with her. So
That's definitely a great point. That's what I was going to talk about. I think a lot of that support comes from the family, so the home as well. So the parents posing it college, post-secondary, continuing to post-secondary as the main option. I think often, especially right now, it gets a little bit difficult right now because of COVID. There might be financial needs in the household, but it goes back to educating the parents on that if they are low income, that a lot of the financial burden will be covered, and having them encourage their students. My older brother, he was never the type of student that liked to sit in a classroom, so he didn't want to continue to a post-secondary education, and my parents forced him, as you said, like, no, you're not leaving this house until you get yourself some type of education. And we have to make sure that we encourage and we tell students that post-secondary education doesn't have to mean four-year institution. It can mean apprenticeship. It can mean what technical institutes as well. That's what my brother does. He's better with his hands, so technical institute is where he finds himself and where he's comfortable. I feel like there's a lot of stigmas behind going to technical institutes, that it's not the same level as a four-year institution, and just making sure that we get rid of those stigmas and we're providing information on those other resources and those other financial aid opportunities they can have through those resources.
I think Catherine or Anna, you guys are going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say also just, I feel like my one bartering power from the high school side is to just say, let's use your senior year as a trial run. Let's fill out your college applications. Let's write your essays. Let's fill out your Fafsa or your WASFA. Because if we do it now, even if you don't go next year, you can either defer or you will at least know what you're doing when you don't have that advising. And telling that to both students and their families, so that way they feel like there's a lack, they don't have to commit right now to knowing their plan, but they are just opening more doors versus closing them by not doing that. But yeah, it is that battle of, as they're saying, like the financial aid, needing finances and needing to work is really important, but also needing to know how to open those doors for yourself and your siblings and your parents later on if they want to go to school too. It's really important too.
Thank you. Thank you. So Tiva, I want to push this question to you. There's a lot of talk about drilling down to the family, communication, building trust. What does that look like in Highline? How do you guys get the message across?
I would say just building rapport over time and being consistent in the things that you do. So I think one way that, or multiple ways that we do that is, one is we do surveys with our families, and we use that to inform practice. We've hosted town halls from some of our different demographics to hear directly from our families. What do you need? What do you want? What are you not getting? And how can we do better as a system to support you and your family? And I think those are the type of things that our families respond to. People are very aware of when they're engaging with someone and there's no trust there. And so being consistent in those practices, the amount of appreciation from a family when you're at their apartment cabana doing financial aid, because we know it's more convenient for them and less convenient for us, is huge. And they talk, our communities talk, they engage with one another. And so to be consistent in those type of practices, to meet your families where they are, to respond when they speak. So if a survey is telling us that this is how our families are feeling and we're not meeting the mark here. We have to be responsive to those things to the best of our ability. And I think those are the things where we've made great strides, that everyone and everything that we support is so community driven. And so starting there, I think our families tell us a lot about how they feel. And so being grounded in student voice and family voice, we have a family action committee that meets with our superintendent regularly. And so using those voices to elevate their concerns and be actionable about it, I think is one of the most effective tools that you can use.
Thank you, Sativa. So one, two quick questions. One is that when you think about financial aid professionals, yes, we have the K-12 system, we have the higher ed system, but thinking about financial aid professionals, what's their role? What do you need from them? Anna, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, and I'm really interested, since I have all of you panelists here and you come from such a diverse array of roles. I'm really curious, as somebody who's out there doing this work and trying to build these partnerships in the community, I'm really curious to ask you all what support you wish you had from your financial aid professionals, or what type of support is really helpful. What do you wish you had? And it's something that I can use and incorporate in my own role.
I can talk a little bit about that. Highline College has been so receptive to our requests, our questions and things like that. So just building partnerships with the K-12 systems, coming out to our financial aid events. Nothing resonates with our families more than the person that's actually going to be processing their application. There's like a sense of legitimacy to your word because you work directly in financial aid. I think a good example of that, and I actually just seen him comment, is I begged Loyal to come to all of our financial aid transition events to work directly with the Highline students. And they address, he works in, over the financial aid department in Highline College. And they found a staff member to come out to every event. And I know that's hard, but it was so necessary for our students to get that information. And we've seen an uptick in our students enroll and have their financial aid completion from the year prior. And so just that continued partnership in itself and being visible. And so that way students and families know who to connect with. And it's not just a financial aid office, but hey, I can call Anna and she'll be able to help me out. And I think putting a face to this really cumbersome financial aid process makes it more tangible for not only the districts that are trying to support students in this process, but also for the students and the families.
Thank you. So I have one last question before turning it back over to Heather. So we've been talking a lot about different kinds of solutions to a very complex problem, but I'm going to try to push you to make it simpler if we could. I know it's not simple. When you think about the entire system, right? It is a pathways system, right? From early childhood, elementary, all the way through post-secondary. If you had to pick perhaps one of the highest leverage points in the system to change this narrative, what would it be? And maybe if we have time, why? Very quickly, like 15 seconds. What lever would you pull that would change this in a very, very big way? Go for it, Linda.
Well, I'm thinking about it because this whole talk itself has brought up so many great points that I've seen so many initiatives already being taken at so many different institutions, for example, Highline, and there's so many great ideas that are working, they're being successful. But I think the problem now is that not everybody is implementing these solutions or these resources. So I think just communication amongst the resources that we already have established to make sure that we can spread the knowledge and spread these techniques that are being successful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't have really an answer for that. That's something I'm going to sit with. But something I did want to bring up, just because I feel like it's not talked about enough in this virtual setting, and I just wanted to bring up to folks, like just thinking about how now in the virtual world, now that we're in the virtual world, and how we communicate with our students has been heavily through email. And I had like a pretty negative experience with a community college that I was, with a student specifically that I was working with who was undocumented, and financial aid office through email was trying to get confirmation in like unwritten that the student was undocumented. So I want folks to not do that because that is against FERPA. And just thinking about those pieces about how to make sure that we're protecting students' immigration statuses through this virtual world. I understand that everybody's, trying the best that they can during this time. But yeah, that was just like something that the financial aid office shouldn't be doing, which I'm actually going to write a report to the council about that situation, because that's something that is not okay. They were trying to confirm that they didn't have a social security number. They wanted it in written to confirm that my student's undocumented. And I'm like, I can't do that. You can give me a call. And, the financial aid office person was like, no, we can't make calls at the moment. And that's just something I wanted to bring up to think through during this time.
Thank you. Maybe one more person.
John,
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that my leverage, you ask us personally what we would think. Mine is going back to what Linda said very early on, and that is the parents don't know what's available to them out there. So the big takeaway for me would be to teach those parents what they don't know. Make them aware of what's available, because the kids at school are getting it, but the parents aren't getting it. And if we can reach that, if we can use that as our lever, we got a chance to get more kids to fill out that financial aid form and moving on post-secondary.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop there before I turn it over to Heather, just a little bit about what I'm seeing. I'll spend 30 seconds, happy to follow up with anyone about giving you concrete information. So I think about Buffalo, New York, right now it was at 90% FAFSA completion. I think they're inching their way toward 100%. When you look at what they've done, it really is a collective effort. You have sided clinics for FAFSA. They bring families, they bring higher ed, everyone to the same places, and they sit with these kids and they fill out the forms. I'm watching Dallas and Commit. They have been able to organize automatic enrollment to colleges amongst a number of partner colleges in Texas. But the Commit partnership, again, doubles down on bringing these communities together and sitting with folks and having these clinics. So it is an all hands on deck push and focusing, frankly, on the junior and senior year of high school and making that happen. So we have a ton of resources as well at the Gates Foundation that we're procuring around this transition, and happy to share those with anyone who wants to reach out. Thank you, panelists. You guys have been terrific. Thank you, audience. Thanks for the great questions. And I'll turn it over now to Heather.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. I know Crystal is going to pull up the last slide that has some last information for everybody. But yes, if I had a button and I could do a round of applause sound, I think I need to get that for the next Pave the Way session so that everybody can feel the audience. Thanks, Becky. Yeah, you can show your reaction, but just really want to applaud everybody. I know some days, just getting through one meeting feels like an accomplishment. So getting through this hour-and-a-half virtual meeting with 130 people, thank you to everybody for showing up and sticking with us for this, and to the panelists for sharing all of your expertise. And a special thank you to you, Jean-Claude, for moderating such really great thought-provoking questions. So I just want to end with this last slide. And we will be posting this up on the website, and we'll actually add in, based off of the chat, we saw there was so many good resources shared, and want to make sure people know about the resources that Wasac offers for statewide, particularly as it relates to the 12th year campaign and our digital tools. We have a texting tool, it's called Otterbot, that students can text into to get help filling out the Fafsa and WASFA. The College and Career Compass is a tool that these are all free for students, that helps students navigate what programs exist here in Washington State and what additional support services like food or housing or childcare might be available. And this is all part of our broader statewide initiative. The Aim Higher Washington initiative is really a statewide effort, collective action effort to say, we are going to increase our FAFSA WASFA completion rates for Washington State, because we know if we do that, that's going to help increase post-secondary enrollment. Again, all of this with a focus on supporting particularly students of color, Black, Indigenous students who are behind when it comes to our FAFSA completion and our enrollment in post-secondary. So this is your kind of last resource slide that we're going to share with you. I hope you captured all of the resources that people were sharing in the chat. Crystal, if you can go to the last slide, it just has some contact information. We are inviting you to join us. If you haven't yet participated in a 12th year campaign, if you haven't yet got in touch around getting community folks in your community trained about how they can help with the Fafsa WASFA completion, email Amelia, join the Pave the Way listserv so you can stay up to date with future events. And stay tuned, join us in this effort so that we as a state can increase our Fafsa WASFA completion rate and really increase the number of students going and enrolling in post-secondary education. Even amidst a global pandemic, we want to make sure that we're there to support our students. So with that, I will thank you all. I wish you a wonderful rest of your week and hope to see you at the next Pave the Way event. Thank you for all of your hard work, and we hope to stay engaged and see you in the future. Take care.